My name is Steve Swinburne, part of the Londonderry Conservation Commission. We are so happy that you're here tonight. It's going to be an interesting evening of how you can turn your backyard or a garden or a piece of your garden into a little bit of a paradise for bees and pollinators and butterflies. So let me introduce you our Presidente of the Londonderry Conservation Commission, Erwin Cooperberg. Erwin?
Thanks, Steve. I'm only the chair. And I'm happy to have you as my co-host this evening, and this is going to be a great presentation. Our speaker tonight is Patrick Kitchen from Be the Change, and Patrick's going to be telling us about the Be the Change program for restoring pollinator sites and restoring the pollinators in Vermont. And I just also want to let you all know that this talk will be on our YouTube channel. For those of you who want to watch it again or share it with friends who didn't make it tonight, we have all of our other talks are on the YouTube channel, so please check that out. And please keep an eye on the Conservation Commission and our different activities, because we're working for you to make Londonderry a little bit nicer and more natural. Steve, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Erwin. And Erwin, you're coming from, where are you actually at the moment?
At the moment, I am in Broward County, Florida. And
how are your pollinators down there?
I don't know. I'm stuck on a family project and I barely get out the door. So
okay, well, thank you for checking in with us. We have a good crew tonight, and I'm thrilled to introduce Patrick, who will talk to us about the importance of pollinators and how we can invite them to our garden. Patrick Kitchen, please, from Be the Change, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Erwin. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you all a little bit about pollinators, their importance, what we at Be the Change do for them, and hopefully a little bit of inspiration on what you all might be able to do in your own backyard. Let me share.
Erwin, did you? Okay, great.
There we go. Okay. So, Be the Change started 7 years ago, back in 2015. I just joined them last summer, and big sort of, I guess, ideal of Be the Change is to use space that humans occupy and share it with pollinators. So that's our bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, beetles, wasps, moths, a whole lot of things. And this bee down in the lower left or lower right, that is an agapostamon, or specifically the bicolored striped sweat bee. It is definitely my favorite bee that I learned about last summer, and I can definitely go on and on about it, but it's just sort of one of the unique bees that I had never known about. You know, before last summer, I was interested in pollinators and knew that they were important to help, but before last summer, I didn't know that there were green bees, and let alone red bees and blue bees, which was really cool. Okay. And then also last summer, this was a big turning point of when I found out about this plant. So this is a narrowleaf mountain mint. I took this photo at our Rock Point location in Burlington, Vermont. And this is in the solar field at the Rock Point school. But I was weeding one day and planting a bunch of potted plants that we had. And I walked by this plant, and heard it. I heard a noise coming from the plant. And I looked over and I just saw so many things fluttering around it. I looked really close and I kind of like got in all these insect faces, and I counted 6 different wasp species, 4 bee species, and 3 fly species, all pollinating this one plant at once. And it was definitely a really cool experience. Since then, I've learned more about the mountain mint and that it is a generalist plant. So it attracts a lot of different pollinators. But yeah, it felt like a very direct impact that I was having on our wildlife, and just planting something that was adapted for our area, how many things it was involving. And then this summer, this was the first bee of the season that I saw, or I should say the spring. This is the unequal cellophane bee, Cleides inequalis. It is a ground nesting bee, much like a lot of other bees. 70% of the bees in the world are actually ground nesting bees, not in a hive on the corner of your house. But this is one of the first bees that will come out for the season. They are responsible for pollinating some of our trees and shrubs, so some maples, viburnum, chokeberry, things like that. It is a really interesting bee to me because it feels like an important bee to Vermont, pollinating some maples that we have, that we hold so dear to our state. So seeing this bee as the first bee of the season was definitely really magical. And I'm in Burlington, Vermont, and I was just walking down a street and I saw it just in a person's front yard. A lot of ground nesting bees loves sandy sort of areas, and I counted about 50 different nests all in this one area, which was really cool. And it sort of goes to show that having these flowering plants in your area, whether you're in an urban area or rural, it can definitely help out a lot of different wildlife. And this fly is called a Nocium, or a biting midge. And it is one fly from the genus Horsepomia, and it is solely responsible for pollinating this fruit. And I'm wondering if anybody can either turn on their mic or type in the chat if they know what this tree is. It grows down in Costa Rica, and it is a, I believe, 80 billion annual industry, $80 billion industry. I don't know if anybody has any guesses.
Coffee?
No.
Cocoa?
Yes, it is cocoa. It is the cacao tree. So chocolate. This genus of fly is solely responsible for creating chocolate, which is such a crazy thing. We all consider flies to be so annoying, and whether you're going out at night and swatting mosquitoes or on a bike ride and you like choke on a swarm of flies or something like that, they definitely don't have a great connotation. But when you look at how they have evolved along with trees and plants, they are a super essential pollinator all around the world. But why are these pollinators in decline? One of the biggest reasons is habitat loss. I would say the other one is pesticide use. But for this presentation, we're going to focus on our habitat loss all around the world. A photo like this might look pretty familiar to a lot of us. Mowed grass is America's #1 crop. We have it everywhere at all of our houses and buildings. And mowed grass is truly habitat to nothing. Nothing is using it except for us. And it is kind of crazy how much we have of it. Even squirrels running by, you know, they are just trying to get to the next bush and to get back under cover. The only thing is probably the worms underneath it that are in that area. And a lot of the mowed grass is privately owned areas. And to put into perspective, 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned, and 78% of the entire US. And to think of some of our privately owned areas and sort of gauge all these areas, Rhode Island is 1.5 million acres. If we accumulate all of the golf courses in America, they make up 2 million acres. If we accumulate all the airports, that's 3 million acres. All roadsides are 17 million acres, and all power lines and pipelines are 21 million acres, which is a ton of space in our country that is either mowed or might just be left for grasses that were brought in from Europe, basically serving little to no wildlife habitat. And this woman is Sherry Mitchell. She is a Penobscot attorney in Maine, and she is the author of a book called Sacred Instructions. It's a very interesting book. She talks about sacred storytelling and relates it to a lot of things that we go through in our lives today and in society today. And in the beginning of the book, she talks about a tale of the Cannibal Giant. And she says, the Cannibal Giant, a creature that is awakened when the Earth Mother calls out in distress because human beings are consuming faster than she can produce and harming faster than she can heal. The giant's role is to lull humanity into a false sense of security and get them to dance faster and faster and consume more and more until they consume themselves to death. Only if the people can awaken to their own destruction and the need for change will the Cannibal Giant be put back to sleep. This story super resonated with me. I think it is a super powerful story, talking about us as a society, and basically we are using so much, and our Earth Mother can't heal herself with how much we are consuming. But that's where Be the Change is trying to change that. So in solar fields, we are planting native pollinator habitat to help our native pollinators. And last summer, we found this bee, Bombus fervidus, a golden northern bumblebee, at our Ferrisburg site. This site is a 40-acre solar field, so it is pretty large. And every year in our solar fields, we do surveying where we take a 20-minute walk and we count every unique pollinator species that we see. And then there's however many pollinators you see, there's X amount that you don't see that are also in the area. And last summer during our walkabout, we found this bumblebee. This is one of our rare bumblebees in Vermont. You won't find it in New Hampshire. It has gotten beaten out of New Hampshire, and it is on that way in Vermont. We are, at our rate that we are going at, we are looking at the same result as New Hampshire. And the Ferrisburg site is 4 years old. We have never seen this bumblebee before. And we saw it. We saw 4 of them last summer, which was crazy to see. And it was real-time evidence of locally restoring one of our rare bees. And along the solar fields, a project that we started this year was our town pollinator project. We are offering pollinator habitat to every town and city in Vermont. We are trying to do them on public spaces, so anybody can go see these areas, and also trying to cut down on mowed grass. And this is the area that we are currently looking at in Londonderry, right off of Route 100. And it is located right at that star. That is where we are going to present to the select board, and see what they have to say about it. But I visited, I believe, in April, and down you can see this path going down is a beautiful field, filled with, I remember seeing goldenrod, some Queen Anne's lace, even though that is not native. It does help out some pollinators, and right where the arrow is pointing, I saw these 2 bees. It was a huge cluster of ground nesting bees, the Andrena regularis, and there was so many of them nesting in the ground, I couldn't even count how many nesting holes there were. And as I was getting closer and closer, trying to take the best photo I could, I saw this red bee, Nomada bethuni. And I didn't know their exact species when I saw them. I went on iNaturalist and ended up finding out, and I highly recommend you all venturing into iNaturalist and finding some species through there. But what I did find out about the Nomada bethuni is that it is a cuckoo bee. It parasitizes other bee species' eggs and lays its eggs down, and they hatch prior to the host bee, and their babies basically use the food that the Andrena had brought. But it's very interesting because it is specialized to this Andrena species. Without the Andrena regularis, there would be no Nomada bethuni, which is super cool. And it is in Londonderry. On iNaturalist, it has only been recorded 3 times in Vermont, and this is one of the 3. A very rare cuckoo bee to see. So now what to potentially plant in your backyards? And I say so many options because if you're like me, you go into the plant nurseries or wherever you might be shopping for seeds or shrubs, whatnot. There's so many options. You don't know where to look, and it's pretty intimidating. So first, I want to talk about native to Vermont. I don't want you to try to find the best native to my backyard plant, because Vermont, I don't think there has ever been this much open space in Vermont. I think historically it has been a very forested area. So who knows if we've had all the pollinators that we do now in this area. It is us humans that have opened up the corridor. Monarchs never used to come up this north. It wasn't until farming and Europeans coming over that we opened up the area for monarchs to come up this north. And so I would look at plants that help pollinators. And that also gets into cultivars versus nativars. So in these photos, one, the Monarda balmy purple is a cultivar, and the Monarda bradburyana is the nativar. So the cultivar is a lot like our crops, where it has been cultivated to do a certain purpose. Maybe that is more flowers blooming. Maybe that's a different color. Maybe that's a longer blooming period. And unfortunately, these things are trade-offs. With something like more flowers, they might be trading off to have less nectar, which is actually not helping the pollinators. And there are studies behind that. A lot of cultivars are a lot worse than nativars for our pollinators. And you can tell what they are because they have these quoted names in them. So I would recommend staying away from those if you are trying to help pollinators. If you want to have a cultivar because you just love the color so much and it reminds you of your childhood for some reason, get it. I think you should have what you want in your yard, and you can have a mix of things that will help pollinators and things that might not necessarily be specialized for them. And then climate change, along with native to Vermont, another butterfly, the tiger swallowtail, never used to come up this north. It is going past Vermont now into Canada, and 20, 30 years ago, it never used to come past Connecticut. So we are starting to have to make habitat that might not necessarily have been 20, 30 years ago. So it's constantly evolving on what might necessarily be the best thing to plant in your yard. And then one more thing is having natives versus not having non-natives. So what does that mean? Non-natives are not the worst thing in the world. You can still have a non-native and it will help out a lot of pollinators because it is a great nectar resource. Along with the cultivars, if you really want a ginkgo tree, it is not going to harm any of the wildlife. It won't necessarily provide as much habitat as a native tree, but it will not do any harm. So again, making a mixture of things is not so bad. And that tree will still photosynthesize and protect shade to other plants potentially, and stuff like that. And these are also some good resources for finding out what things to plant. Xerxes Society specializes in pollinators and invertebrates conservation. They're based out of California, but they do a lot of good seminars, and they do different things that they record and post on their YouTube. I, the other month, watched one that was sort of specialized for farmers in New England and what they could be doing in their areas. And the Audubon Society, I'm sure a lot of you know, they are specializing in birds, but a lot of bird habitat is invertebrate habitat as well. One of my favorite shrubs is elderberry. Elderberry is a great pollinating shrub, and birds love it too. And birds love caterpillars. It is a great storytelling to attract a lot of different wildlife to your home. And then the Native Plant Trust is specifically in New England, but it has a great search bar where you can filter a lot of things. If you're looking for something specifically that you want in a shaded, acidic soil, you can filter all those. You can make it, you can find out what is a pollinator powerhouse, what is deer resistant, what is might specifically be adjusted for my area, whether you're on Western Vermont or Eastern Vermont. It is just a really good search tool to find out different species. And then one more resource is just going to talk to people in your town or a neighboring town that owns a plant nursery. They tend to know all the facts. If you talk to them and say, I want X, Y, and Z, they are a great resource. You can find out on your own, research some things and go in and ask them about it. I don't know many plant nurseries down in Londonderry. I go to a place in Essex, Vermont, known as Full Circle, and they are great there. And they definitely know their stuff. So just going around and talking to people in your neighborhood, I think, is a great way to find out things that you might specifically want in your yard. But yeah, thank you. I will take questions now.
If everybody could unmute, and if anybody's got questions. Patrick, one of the things I've heard recently is the lack of bugs smeared on your windshield as you're driving. I remember as a kid, going on any kind of trip, we could be, might have been in the car for an hour, and I just remember my dad saying, "Look at all these bugs," and he'd grab something and start cleaning them off. And it's pretty rare. I mean, I drive to Brattleboro, and I might have one bug on my. Is that the proof of just the lack of bugs out there, habitat loss, mowing, and just a combination of things that you were talking about?
Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily use that word, but yeah, if I had to take a guess, I would say that is a good indicator of what we're going through. But another thing to consider is car design nowadays. Things are a lot more aerodynamic, so having that more angled windshield versus an older car that might have a more vertical windshield, that is going to hit bugs more head on and kill them versus them sliding right over. So I think there's that to consider. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we are seeing less invertebrates than we did however many years ago. There's a lot of studies out there that show that basically all insects are declining.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? What do you have to say about jumping worms? Asian jumping worms.
Asian jumping worms? I don't know much about Asian jumping worms. But are they invasive?
Apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't battled Asian jumping worms in the fields.
Do you have them up in Burlington? Because we have them in Londonderry.
I have never heard of them.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Although I guess I don't go under the soil often unless we're planting.
Right.
I more see the things flying around. Yeah.
Okay.
Do they jump up at you?
Do they what?
Jump at you?
Yeah, they get around the neck and they take a bite. No,
Yeah.
no. They apparently they eat the first 2 or 3 inches of the organic material, so they, I would say, maybe weaken the soil for plants, and sugar makers, maple syrup makers are concerned about the maple forest. Garden centers are concerned about them because they can be transported, not so much the adults, but the eggs. And I just recently solarized my garden, my vegetable garden. I kept plastic on, a thin, clear plastic, for about 3 weeks, hoping to heat up the soil and thereby destroying the eggs. And I just planted my garden a few days ago, so we'll see whether it did any good. Normally, you don't see the adults until a little bit later on, but you can tell you've got an Asian jumping worm because they have this kind of white circle around their body. yeah, they're sometimes called snake worms. They move very quickly. And as you say, they're pretty spotty. They've been sighted in Manchester and certainly up here in the mountains.
Very
I
interesting.
just wonder that might have some effect on pollination, pollinator plants at some point down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested to research now about practices in removing invasive worms. Because
there's a guy that we had, I can't remember, Jane, I don't know if you remember the guy that we had from he's up in the UVM. He was studying this issue and gave our group a presentation. So you could probably check with UVM. You talk about non-native versus native pollination plants. I use a lot around here Mexican sunflower, Tithonia. And I'm assuming that's not native because just by the very name of it. But I tell you, that thing brings in more butterflies and bees. Have you heard that one?
I don't know the exact species, but we use a regionally native seed mix. So the farthest native plant is Cosmos, which is also a Texas, Mexico annual. But pollinators love it. In the photo of the bumblebee, Bombus fervidus, that is rare in Vermont, it was feeding on Cosmos. So it definitely holds some truth. And I think the thing to look at with non-natives, so things that are not from North America, I would say might not be my first choice to plant. But if they're not invasive, then you're not doing any harm necessarily, right. Don't plant any bamboo. That will just ruin the whole area. But yeah, that is sort of the principle to look at is non-natives are not invasives. They're two different things.
Got it. Huh. Okay. Well, that was great. What, Jane, you got something? Question? Kim?
I have a question.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
What would you recommend for a homeowner to get started, creating a pollinator garden? Like, do you offer like handouts or a kit that you can purchase or recommendations that I know you recommended a few things tonight, but just like if I just want to make a pollinator garden, how would I start? And do you encourage everyone to have a pollinator patch in their yard?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, good question. I don't know the necessarily local places to Londonderry to go and purchase things, but a place where we get our seeds is American Meadows, and you can go and see the species in their seed mix, and it'll tell you all the species. So it's things like milkweed, Joe Pye weed, black-eyed Susan, things like that. And that's a great way to just see the species. And it has some specialists, some generalists. So it's nice to have a mix of those things. But yeah, those websites that I told you about, they have so many resources to go and see, and you can read about what things certain pollinators need. You know, there's the tale as old as time of milkweed and monarch. The monarch cannot lay its eggs on anything else but milkweed. It can pollinate other things, but it can't lay its eggs on anything else. So without the milkweed, you have no monarch. And there's a lot of other examples like that. So reading about them, but yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you're looking for just an assortment of things, look at American Meadows, and they have good seed mixes. And
so is that
yeah.
basically how it starts? Is like, how would you start it? Like, are you going to be making a pollinator garden in Londonderry?
Yeah, the plan is to do that. It has not been approved yet. The site has not been approved yet, but yeah, so the process of what we do, because we do larger areas, is bring in a tiller, and we till up an area probably a few times because it has grasses there, and grasses are quite competitive to work with. But if you lay tarp down on an area of your yard and kind of drown out the grass from getting any sun exposure, that will basically kill whatever is underneath it. And then the next year you can lift it up and it'll just be soil underneath there. And that is really good space. You'll still have the grass seed underneath there, so you have to watch out about that, but it's exposed soil that you can plant in, and then you just look after it, you know, every couple weeks, and you weed just like you would any other bed. But yeah, that's a good way to make new beds. And I will say, with seeding can be difficult, and starting things from seed is a difficult process. I don't know if any of you have any experience with that, but yeah, it is. If you get a tray and you put a couple of seeds in different plugs, like a 72 cup tray, that is a much more successful way of starting things from seed than throwing seed on the ground and watering it. It's not as successful as a method, as I'm sure you have experience.
So how large a field or how large an area? I mean, I know that's kind of a weird question, but like,
No,
it depends whatever size, or what is a good size to have for a pollinator garden?
Planting a single milkweed is better than not planting the milkweed. So anything helps. Big or small, you are creating habitat for something, making the whole landscape, whether you want to consider your landscape as your neighborhood or Londonderry or Vermont, you are making a more connected landscape of pollinators to be able to travel, and creating nectar resources. So I would say that you won't find any ecologists with no mowed grass on their area. People love mowed grass, and that's it. So don't think that you have to make your entire yard into a wild meadow, but finding those areas where this could be a planted area and this can be a planted area, you'll create a more connected landscape, which I think is just the way to think about it. But yeah, good question.
How is, I was just in Orwell, and I found some false indigo bush, and it had a lot of bees and whatever hanging around it.
Yeah.
Do you know, is that a native plant? Do you know?
False indigo.
Yeah, beautiful plant.
Yeah,
Jane, that's in the triangle across from the shopping center.
Is it really? No.
Yeah, that's false indigo.
This thing
I
was,
think-
it kind
Yeah,
of
right
looked,
in the triangle, right across from the shopping center. That's false indigo.
because
there's
false
a-
indigo grows pretty high. You don't want to.
There's a
leave the-
couple of different species, I think, but that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I think historically it hasn't been in Vermont. But yeah, your experience of seeing a lot of pollinators feeding on it is something to be thought about. And, you know, I just looked it up, and it says Pennsylvania, South North Carolina, and Tennessee. So that is technically its native range, but it is helping the pollinators that are also up in here. So if you think it's beautiful, then plant it in your yard. Yeah.
Well, it was right on the shores of Champlain, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you're not, I don't know how of a drive it is to Orwell.
About an hour and a half.
Okay. We get a lot of our plants from a nursery in Orwell. I believe they're called Wetland Plant Nursery. And they might only do sort of big, larger scale sales.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth a look into. Vermont Wetland Plant Supply. It's a local place, but
Yeah.
they're great. And
I'll look
yeah.
them up.
Yeah.
Didn't know they were there.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the pollinator garden. I'm always fascinated about things like that. And the one in Londonderry, I don't know anything about it, but is that going to be kind of a public place where you can go and look at all the insects? And are you going to be like identifying the plants and insects and that sort of thing?
That's the idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds
So-
awesome.
Yeah, it's right
Go ahead.
where the town's sand supply is.
At Prouty Park?
Prouty Park,
Yeah.
yes.
There we
Yeah.
go.
And is
Yeah,
it
and
way
the-
is it way in the back, you said, in a back
Mhm.
field, or I'm a little confused the location?
Yeah. So it's right basically
Right.
in between the driveway of that park and Route 100, the main road.
Okay.
And so you would see it at driving by.
Oh, great.
But I would also recommend taking a walk down there, because it's a great meadow back in those backwoods along the river. And yeah, me and Jane and Erwin and Helen, we all walked back there, and it was pretty magical
Yeah, that was great.
seeing it all. Yeah.
Kim, have you ever been there?
I've only been to this where you get the sand. I have
Oh,
not
Yeah.
been.
you gotta go take that. It's a nice walk down to the river. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
I'd love to try that. I'd love it.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing is, Kim and Jane and others, Patrick, when you do this, can we make it where people can come and see what you're doing and make it like a public event? Or do you want it more private when you're doing what you're doing?
Well, we'll be there with the tiller. So if people want to come see us till an area, by all means. I don't think it's anything too special, but I think the thing to come see is the end product. And yeah, we are also doing educational signage. So you'll
Right.
be able to read a tiny bit of what is going on in front of you, kind of thing. And yeah, just to go admire what is growing there. But if you see something growing and flowering and things feeding and pollinating it, I highly recommend using iNaturalist. It's a great resource to learn. And you take a photo of whatever you see, anything. It could be a plant, an insect, the bear in your backyard, and post it on iNaturalist. And chances are that somebody will tell you. Yeah, there you go. Chances are, oh, it exited out. Yeah, chances are somebody will be able to tell you what you saw. And then that is one step further of going to plant in your backyard. Yeah,
it's a great resources. I mean, you could just take a picture, pop it on there, and so many people chime in about what this thing is. It's really wonderful.
One thing that Mary Butera and I did quite a few years ago, we actually belonged to the Monarch monitoring program, where we took a patch and then we would go and observe. They gave us all these little things and did a monarch count. And that was really fun, and it was really interesting to do that. I can't remember the specifics of it, but I actually still have a lot of the paperwork from it. But that might be a fun activity too, is to, really see how many insects come. Do you monitor things like that after the field is planted? And this was just actually a random field just on the side of the road that Mary and I did. And
yeah, we do in our solar fields. We survey how many pollinators we see in a 20-minute walk. And we do that once a year. So we, at a site in New Haven, Vermont, we see how many pollinators we see before we plant. And usually before we plant, we see around 35 pollinators in the area. And then a year after planting, we see about 170 just the next year. And then after that, we saw over 300
Wow.
in the area.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, unless anybody has any other comments or questions, we'd like to thank Patrick for his time and giving us some ideas about what we can do. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about your involvement in the Londonderry Pollinator Garden. Is that coming this month, next month? Do we have a date on that yet or not?
We need the okay first, I guess.
Oh,
Yeah.
Got it. Well, what's the holdup with that?
I don't know. We can do something about that.
Patrick, it sounds wonderful. Your organization sounds really neat. I looked at your website today, and if you haven't been on Be the Change website, it's worth just going through that a little bit. It's really fun.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, and following you on Instagram and so forth. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks, folks, for being here. This program is going to be, it's recorded and it's on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you've missed or want to go back and look at some of those Latin names, you can go do that. But thank you, everyone. And thank you, Patrick, for coming out.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for having
you.
me.